The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, white glow over the empty rows of cubicles as I sat alone in the server room. It was 8 o'clock on a Friday night, and the rest of the office had cleared out hours ago for happy hour. I was the only one left, monitoring the progress bar of a massive database migration I had been planning for 3 months. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, sitting next to a stack of hard drives, but I didn't mind. I was the IT director, and ensuring the safety of the company's data was my responsibility, a duty I took seriously. The gentle whir of the cooling fans was usually a sound that brought me peace, a white noise that helped me focus on the complex command lines scrolling down my 3 monitors. I rubbed my eyes, exhausted but satisfied that we were hitting the 90% completion mark without a single error. Then my phone buzzed violently against the hard surface of the desk, shattering the silence. I picked it up, expecting a panicked message from a user who had locked themselves out or a server alert. Instead, I saw a text from Stetson, the CEO, my brow furrowed. Stetson never texted me this late. I slid my thumb across the screen to unlock it. The message was short, brutal, and riddled with typos. "Hey Reeve, budget is tight. We're outsourcing it to a cheaper agency starting Monday. Don't come in. Leave your badge on the desk. You're done." I stared at the words, reading them 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from sleep deprivation. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, of saving this company from ransomware attacks, of working through Christmas, had just ended with a text message sent while I was the only person keeping his business running. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone against the server rack. Instead, a cold, heavy sensation settled in the pit of my stomach like I had swallowed a stone. It was the distinct taste of betrayal. Stetson claimed the budget was tight. He claimed this was a necessary financial decision to keep the lights on. But I managed the hardware procurement budget. I knew the numbers better than he did. We were profitable. In fact, we had just posted a record quarter. The excuse didn't add up. I looked at the text again, the casual cruelty of it burning into my retina. I decided to verify his claim before I packed a single box. I still had my administrative login access. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clicking sound echoing in the empty room. I logged into the payroll and executive expense system one last time. The screen loaded, revealing the company's recent expenditures in stark black and white. I scrolled past the utility bills and standard vendor payments until I found the anomaly. Just 48 hours ago, a new lease agreement had been signed and processed. It was for a Porsche 911 GT3, titanium gray. The company was listed as the primary guarantor for the payments. The annual cost of the lease, the premium insurance, and the maintenance package was exactly $120,000. My annual salary was $115,000. Stetson hadn't fired me to save the company from bankruptcy. He had fired me to free up the exact amount of cash he needed to drive a sports car he couldn't afford. The realization made my hands steady. He valued a status symbol more than my livelihood. Stetson had made a critical, amateur mistake, one born of arrogance and technical illiteracy. He had fired his IT director via text message on a Friday night, but he hadn't actually contacted the IT department to revoke my access credentials, because I was the IT department. He assumed that by telling me, "You're done," the computers would magically know to lock me out. He was wrong. I still had admin root privileges. I had the digital keys to the entire kingdom. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking, and looked at the blinking cursor. I could delete the database right now. I could wipe the backups. I could set the server room on fire digitally, but that was too messy. It was illegal, and it would make me the villain. I wanted something more precise. I wanted him to understand exactly who he had crossed. I decided to take a look around his personal files. Stetson used his work laptop for everything because he was too cheap to buy a personal one for home use. I remotely accessed his desktop directory, bypassing his weak password. Stetson 1, in seconds. I began to sift through his folders. Most of it was boring corporate fluff, outdated presentations, and headshots. But then, buried deep within a directory labeled System 32, which he probably thought sounded technical enough to scare people away, I found a folder named Tax Docs. It was a strange place to store taxes, hidden so deep. I double-clicked it. I opened the folder, expecting to find PDF files of tax returns or W-2 forms. Instead, I found a digital graveyard of his integrity. It was a repository of infidelity, meticulously cataloged. The folder contained hundreds of files, organized by date. There were hotel receipts for the Ritz-Carlton and the Four Seasons, dated for weekends when he claimed to be at leadership conferences in Chicago or New York. There were invoices for diamond jewelry from Tiffany and Cartier, scanned and saved for insurance purposes. And there were emails, hundreds of them, saved as PDF files. They weren't to his wife, Solange. They were to Avalon, his 23-year-old executive assistant who had been hired 6 months ago straight out of college. I opened a few of the emails, my stomach turning. They were graphic. They were embarrassing. He promised Avalon that he was going to leave Solange soon. He promised her a life of luxury, travel, and status. He joked about how easy it was to spend the old lady's money without her noticing. I felt sick reading them. Solange was a kind, elegant woman who often came to the office. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She brought homemade cookies during the holidays. And here was her husband, using company funds to buy expensive lingerie for a woman young enough to be his daughter, all while firing me to cover the costs of his lifestyle. The tax docs folder wasn't just dirt, it was a nuclear weapon. I needed to understand the full power dynamic before I made my move. I dug deeper into the email archives, specifically searching for correspondence between Stetson and his accountant. I found a thread from 3 years ago that clarified everything. The email subject was shareholder dividend distribution. I read the attachment, which detailed the corporate structure Stetson tried hard to hide from the staff. Stetson owned 20% of the company. Solange owned 80%. She had inherited the capital to start the business from her father's estate. Stetson was the CEO in title, the face of the operation on LinkedIn, but Solange was the bank. She was the silent majority shareholder. She controlled the board. She controlled the money. And according to the receipts I had just found, Stetson was using her dividends, money that legally belonged to the company profits, to fund his affair. He wasn't just a cheater. He was an embezzler stealing from his own wife to fund a life he hadn't earned. The leverage I held was suddenly heavier than I could have imagined. I wasn't just holding a match. I was holding a flamethrower aimed at his entire existence. He thought he was the king of the castle, but he was just the jester stealing the queen's gold. I checked the digital calendar on the wall. Monday morning at 9:00 a.m., there was an all-hands meeting scheduled. The text message had mentioned that a cheaper agency was taking over starting Monday. I checked the vendor onboarding list. He had hired a guy named Kaysen. I knew Kaysen. He was the nephew of Stetson's golf buddy. Kaysen was a college dropout who had failed his basic certification exams twice. He was cheap because he was incompetent. He wouldn't know how to handle the migration I was in the middle of. He certainly wouldn't know the encryption keys to the secure servers. I decided it was time to initiate the dead man's switch. This was a protocol I had designed for catastrophic system failure, a way to lock down the system in case of a breach. Tonight, I was the catastrophe. I went into the main server configuration. I reset the master administrative password. I didn't make it password 123. I generated a 64-character string of random letters, numbers, and symbols. It was uncrackable by brute force. It would take a supercomputer decades to guess it. I wrote the code down on a single yellow sticky note. I folded the note carefully and put it in the back pocket of my jeans. Then, I severed the remote connection access for everyone but the root user. The system was now a fortress, and I was the only one with the key. Now for the delivery. I opened my work email for the last time. I drafted a new message. The subject line was simple: regarding the budget cuts. I didn't write a long, angry rant. I didn't call Stetson names or threaten him. I simply wrote, per Stetson's instructions, I am departing to save the company money. I thought you should see exactly where the budget is going. I clicked the paperclip icon. I attached the entire contents of the tax docs folder. It took a few minutes to upload because the files were so large. High-resolution photos of jewelry and long PDF receipts take up a lot of space. Once it was uploaded, I went to the to field. I typed Solange. Her personal email address auto-populated from the company directory. I added the board of directors to the CC line. Then I clicked the small arrow next to the send button. I selected schedule send. I set the time for Monday, 9:00 a.m. That was exactly when Stetson would be standing at the podium, starting his meeting about fiscal responsibility. I hit confirm. The email sat in the outbox, a ticking time bomb waiting for Monday morning. It was the perfect goodbye gift. I stood up and looked around my office, the place I had practically lived in for half a decade. I took the picture of my dog off the desk. I took my lucky stress ball and my favorite pen. I left the company badge sitting in the center of the empty desk, just as he had asked. I grabbed a microfiber cloth and meticulously wiped down my keyboard, mouse, and the power button of the monitor. I didn't want any reason for them to claim I damaged the hardware physically or left a mess. I walked out of the server room, listening to the hum of the machines one last time. I locked the heavy security door behind me. I walked out of the building into the cool night air. The parking lot was empty, illuminated by a single flickering street lamp. I felt a strange sense of freedom mixed with the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I pulled out my phone. Stetson's text was still on the screen. I typed a reply. Understood. Good luck with the migration. I hit send. Then I went into my contacts, found Stetson's number, and scrolled down to the bottom. I tapped block caller. I got into my car, drove home, and slept better than I had in 5 years, knowing that Monday was going to be a very interesting day. Monday morning arrived with a bright, deceptive calm. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard every detail later from Tobin, a senior developer who was still on the inside and loyal to the work we had done. At 8:30 a.m., Kaysen, the new IT agency, arrived. He walked in wearing a suit that was too big for him, carrying a laptop that looked 5 years old and covered in stickers. He marched up to the server room door and tried to badge in. The reader beeped red. I had deactivated all badges, except for the janitor and Solange. Kaysen had to get a security guard to let him in, explaining awkwardly that there was a glitch. He sat down at the main terminal to start his first day, looking confident. He tried to log in with the credentials Stetson had given him. Access denied. He tried the backup admin account. Access denied. He tried to reboot the server physically, thinking it just needed a refresh. When the screen came back up, it demanded a 64-character encryption key. Kaysen stared at the black screen, sweating. The entire company system, email, files, client data, payroll, was locked down. The screens throughout the office were dark. Chaos was just beginning. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the employees gathered in the main boardroom. Stetson stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, wearing a brand new bespoke suit, looking confident and tanned. He loved the sound of his own voice. He began his speech about trimming the fat and moving towards a leaner, more efficient future. He didn't mention me by name. He just said legacy inefficiencies were being removed to streamline operations. Solange was there, sitting in the back row near the door. She usually just listened quietly, supporting him from the sidelines. Suddenly, a notification sound chimed on her phone, then another chime from a board member's iPad, then another. It was a domino effect of digital alerts rippling through the room. Stetson paused his speech, looking annoyed at the interruption. "If we could please silence our devices," he said arrogantly, adjusting his tie. In the back of the room, Solange unlocked her phone. I imagine her eyes widening as she read the subject line. I imagine her breath catching in her throat as she opened the first attachment. Her face, usually composed and gentle, went pale, and then flushed a deep, angry crimson. The scheduled email had landed. Solange stood up. The sound of her chair scraping violently against the floor echoed in the silent room. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her phone. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room where Stetson stood frozen. He looked confused, his smile faltering. "Honey," Solange. "I'm in the middle of the presentation," he said, trying to maintain his authority in front of the staff. Solange didn't stop until she was 2 feet away from him, invading his personal space. She held up her phone, turning the screen so he could see it. It displayed a high-definition photo of Avalon posing on a private boat in a bikini, holding a glass of champagne. The caption of the forwarded email read, "Invoice, yacht rental corporate expense client relations." Solange's voice was ice cold, carrying to every corner of the room. "Is this part of the budget cuts, Stetson? Is the $3,000 yacht rental for client relations part of our lean future?" The room went deathly silent. Every employee stared at the phone, then turned their heads to look at Avalon, who was sitting in the front row, shrinking into her seat. Stetson stammered, his confidence evaporating instantly. He looked like a deer in headlights. That's a fabrication, he lied, his voice climbing an octave. The email was hacked. It's fake. Someone is trying to sabotage me. He rushed to his presentation laptop connected to the projector. I can show you the financial reports. I can prove it's a lie. He frantically tapped the keys to pull up the quarterly spreadsheets to defend himself. He hit enter with a flourish. The projector screen behind him didn't show a spreadsheet. It showed a black terminal window with blinking white text. System locked. Encryption key required. Stetson froze. He realized in that moment that he was locked out of his own company. He couldn't access the fake reports he had prepared. He couldn't delete the evidence from his own hard drive because the network drive was inaccessible. He was trapped in a room with his angry wife, his exposed mistress, and a locked computer that refused to save him. The technology he had dismissed as a cost was now his prison. I was sitting on my couch, wearing my favorite pajamas and drinking a mimosa, watching the morning news. The sun was streaming in and I felt relaxed. My landline rang. I kept a landline for emergencies and Stetson was the only person from work who knew the number. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice cheerful and polite. Who is this? I heard heavy breathing and the unmistakable sound of panic on the other end. It's Stetson, he screamed. Fix the server right now and tell Solange those emails are fake. Tell her you forged them as revenge. I took a slow sip of my drink, savoring the citrus. I'm sorry, sir, I said, my tone professional. I don't work for your company anymore. I was let go on Friday via text message. I believe you have a new agency handling these things. Have you tried asking Kaysen? He swore loudly. Reeve, I will sue you. Unlock it. I laughed. My consultation rate for non-employees is $1,000 an hour, paid up front in cash. If you don't have a contract, I can't help you. I hung up the phone and unplugged the cord from the wall. Back in the office, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Solange had seen enough. She walked past Stetson and kicked the wheels of his expensive ergonomic chair, sending it rolling into the wall with a loud crash. She sat down at the head of the table, claiming the seat of power. She looked at the black screen, then at the terrified staff. Tobin, she called out. Tobin, the senior developer, stood up immediately. Yes, ma'am. Get this system online. Now, she ordered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Tobin walked up to the laptop. He typed a few commands, checked the server's status, and shook his head. I can't, Solange, he said honestly. The encryption is AES 256. Reeve built the security protocol herself. It's a dead man's switch. Without the key she created, this system is a brick. It would take a supercomputer 100 years to crack it. Stetson fired the only person who knows the code. Solange looked at Stetson, her eyes narrowing. She realized that by firing me to buy a Porsche, he had thrown away the only key to the vault. Solange turned her attention to the human problem in the room. She stood up and walked over to where Avalon was sitting. Avalon was trembling, clutching her designer bag, a bag Solange now knew she had unknowingly paid for. Stand up, Solange commanded. Avalon stood, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I didn't know, she sobbed. He told me you were separated. He told me the marriage was over. Solange didn't blink. She motioned to the security guard by the door. Escort her out, Solange said. And Avalon, leave the Cartier bracelet on the table. I saw the receipt in the folder. It was bought with my dividends. The entire room watched as Avalon unclasped the bracelet, dropped it on the mahogany table with a clatter, and was marched out of the room by security. It was a brutal, public dismantling of Stetson's fantasy life. The room was silent, save for the sound of Avalon's heels clicking as she was removed from the premises. The drama in the boardroom was interrupted by the ringing of the main office telephone line. The receptionist, terrified and not knowing what else to do, answered it and transferred it to the speakerphone in the boardroom. It's Mr. Miller, she squeaked. Miller was their biggest client, a manufacturing giant responsible for 40% of their revenue. Stetson lunged for the phone, desperate for a distraction. Mr. Miller, how are you? He said, his voice cracking. Why is your website down? Miller yelled, his voice booming through the room. Customers can't check out. My logistics portal is offline. I'm losing sales by the second. I tried to email your support team and it bounced back. Stetson wiped sweat from his forehead. We're having a minor glitch, sir. It will be up momentarily. Miller wasn't having it. "Fix it in 1 hour, Stetson, or I pull the contract. I can't afford a partner who goes dark on a Monday morning. I have a business to run." The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavy with impending doom. In a state of total panic, Stetson turned to Kaysen, who was shrinking into the corner. "Hackett!" he screamed, spitting as he yelled. "You're the IT guy. Break the code. Do something." Kaysen looked like he was going to vomit. He sat down at the keyboard and started typing random administrative commands he had found on Google on his phone. He tried to force a reboot. He tried to bypass the BIOS. He didn't know what he was doing. My security system was designed to detect incompetence. It noticed the brute force attempt and the unauthorized command strings. It interpreted Kaysen's clumsiness as a hostile intrusion event. The defensive protocol kicked in. On the big screen, the text changed from white to red. "Threat DETCTD. Local cache wipe initiated." Stetson screamed as his laptop screen flashed blue, then went black. The server data was safe and encrypted. But Stetson's local hard drive, the one containing his only copies of his personal files and his own defense evidence, was being scrubbed clean. He had just lost his own leverage because he hired a cheap replacement. An hour later, a courier arrived at my house. It was a letter from a law firm. Stetson had hired a lawyer named Harlan to threaten me. I opened the envelope. It was a cease and desist and a demand for the passwords, citing corporate sabotage and theft of intellectual property. It threatened a lawsuit for damages if I didn't comply within 2 hours. I didn't panic. I walked to my filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents. I pulled out my original employment contract, signed 5 years ago by Stetson himself. I highlighted Clause 14B. Upon termination of employment, the employee is released from all responsibilities regarding system maintenance, uptime, or data accessibility. The company assumes full liability for asset handover. He had fired me without a handover. He had told me not to come in. Legally, the system state was his problem. I snapped a photo of the clause and emailed it to Harlan. 10 minutes later, I got a reply from the lawyer's office. "We are withdrawing our representation of Mr. Stetson at this time." Even the lawyer knew a losing battle when he saw one. At 2:00 p.m., a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't the Porsche. That was probably hiding in a garage somewhere, or maybe he couldn't get the keys out of his locked office. It was Stetson's wife's sedan. Stetson got out. He looked disheveled. His tie was undone, his shirt was stained with sweat, and his face was red. He walked up to my front door and started banging on it. "Reeve, open up," he shouted. "I know you're in there." I didn't open the door. I pulled up the Ring camera feed on my phone and spoke through the speaker. "Get off my porch, Stetson," I said. He looked up at the camera, desperation in his eyes. "Please," he begged. "Solange froze my personal accounts. Miller is threatening to sue. I need the company running or I lose everything. I'll pay you whatever you want." I watched him squirm. "You fired me via text to save money, Stetson," I reminded him. "You wanted budget cuts. Look how much you've saved today." "You can't afford me anymore." I turned off the camera feed. Stetson eventually left, defeated. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. The caller ID said Solange. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was different from the morning. It wasn't angry, it was tired but sharp. "Reeve," she said, "I'm sorry for disturbing you at home." "It's okay, Solange," I said softly. "I didn't want to hurt the company, I just wanted you to know," she sighed. "I know, and I thank you for showing me. I know he's a thief. I know he's been lying for years. But there are 50 other people who work in that building. Good people, like Tobin. They didn't do this. They have mortgages and families. I need to save the company for them. Name your price to unlock the server." She wasn't bullying me. She was negotiating with respect. She understood the value of my work in a way Stetson never did. I agreed to meet Solange at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. She arrived looking immaculate despite the chaos of her day. She sat down and placed a folder on the table. "I want the key," she said, "and I want you back." I shook my head. "I can't work for him, Solange. He fired me. The trust is gone." "He won't be there," she said firmly. "I'm filing for divorce. I'm exercising my majority shareholder rights to remove him as CEO effective immediately. I am taking over." She pushed the folder toward me. "I want you as Chief Technology Officer, 3 times your old salary, a 12-month guaranteed contract, and Stetson is never allowed to speak to you again. You report only to me." I looked at the contract. It was generous, it was fair, and it was vindication. I picked up a pen. "Done," I said, "and I need a new office. I don't want the basement anymore." Solange smiled for the first time that day. "Take Stetson's office," she said. I walked back into the office on Wednesday morning. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Word had spread that Solange was in charge and that I was coming back. As I walked through the glass doors of the lobby, I saw a pathetic sight. Stetson was sitting on a bench near the security desk, holding a cardboard box containing a few picture frames, a stapler, and a potted plant. He was waiting for his Uber because Solange had taken the car keys. He looked up as I approached. He looked tired, broken, and small. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an insult. I didn't slow down. I swiped my badge, my new CTO badge, at the turnstile. The light turned a crisp, welcoming green beep. I walked past him without even looking down. He was a ghost. He was a deleted file. I was the administrator now. I heard the automatic doors swoosh open behind me as he left the building for the last time. I took the elevator up to the top floor and walked into Stetson's old office. It smelled of his expensive cologne, a scent I would have the cleaners scrub out later. I sat down at his massive mahogany desk. I plugged in my laptop. Tobin and the rest of the dev team were standing in the doorway, looking anxious. "Can you do it?" Tobin asked. "Or is it gone for good?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the yellow sticky note, slightly crumpled now. I smoothed it out on the desk. I opened the command terminal on the main screen. I typed in the 64-character code slowly, savoring every keystroke. I hit enter. The screen flashed. Access granted. Then, one by one, the monitors in the outer office flickered to life. The email server reconnected. The website went live. The cheers from the staff outside were loud enough to rattle the glass walls. Tobin high-fived me. We were back online. The nightmare was over. With the system restored, my first task wasn't to check emails. It was to perform a full forensic audit for Solange. Now that I was looking for it, the evidence was everywhere. I found that Stetson hadn't just been using dividends. He had been siphoning operational funds for years. He had set up fake vendor accounts and was billing the company for services never rendered. I found transfers to offshore gambling sites. I found payments to a shell company registered in his brother's name. This wasn't just grounds for divorce or firing. This was criminal embezzlement. I compiled a digital dossier, thicker and more damning than the first folder. I printed it out and walked it over to Solange's temporary desk. "You might want to call the district attorney," I said, dropping the file in front of her. She opened it, read the first page, and nodded slowly. "Thank you, Reeve." "I will." Stetson wasn't just unemployed. He was likely going to prison. A week later, I was settling into my role. The company was stabilizing. Miller had kept the contract after Solange personally apologized and offered a discount. I stood by the window of the corner office, looking down at the parking lot. A tow truck was backing up to the space labeled CEO. The repo man hooked up the Porsche 911 GT3. Stetson hadn't made the payment, and without the company covering it, the car was gone. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from a blocked number, but the preview still showed up. It was Stetson. "I'm sorry." 2 words, too late. I didn't reply. I didn't feel a thrill of anger anymore. I just felt efficient. I deleted the text, blocked the number again, and locked my phone. Solange walked in, holding a binder. "Ready for the board meeting, boss?" she asked, smiling. I smiled back. "Ready," I said. He thought I was just an expense on a spreadsheet, a line item to be cut to save a few dollars. He never realized that I was the only asset that really mattered. And now, I was the one running the show.